it's cliche to say that you have to think 3 steps ahead of the fire because, most of the time you can't, because if your people are there, you're not going to really have to. But, we use a 27-21 scenario where if you have an exposure problem and that your third or fourth due engine is, twice as far away, now you're shaking out your shorts as a chief because you have 2 lines committed to the interior and they're still getting it and it's exposing, and then you're pulling, whoever you can to maybe start an exposure line. I mean, that's where it gets problematic. And like I said, we have adequate resources in Milwaukee for the most part. And still that can be a problem in my job if something like that were to happen because of a delayed response or something like that. So
breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
All right. Welcome, everybody. This is Eric Dreiman, host of the Hooks and Hoses podcast for the Fire Engineering Network. I want to thank you for tuning in this month. I want to welcome my guest, retired Chief Erich Roden from the Milwaukee Fire Department. Really excited to have Eric on the podcast. Many of you may know his name from his career, whether it was involved with fire engineering, FDIC, or the Milwaukee Fire Department, or any of his other endeavors throughout his career. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. We're going to talk about a lot of things that I hope, I don't hope, I know the audience will find informative based on our conversation we had before we started recording. But before we get going, Eric, if you would, just introduce yourself to the audience for anyone who doesn't know who you are, or maybe have heard your name but doesn't really know your background. How'd you get started in the fire service? Once you got started, your career, and then even now what you're doing since You've left the Milwaukee Fire Department and you've continued to contribute to the American Fire Service.
So as of this week, I will have been retired for exactly 1 year. I retired as a deputy chief, which is of operations, which is a citywide tour commander position, a job I loved, miss every day. And I've been in the fire service approximately 32 years. I've worked as a volunteer. I've worked in a suburb before I left for the city, and I've pretty much had my fingers in everything since. So I've heavily into the training side of the fire service. Taught at a local tech college for 25 years. Just joined another one to do some teaching, but I've been involved heavily in the publishing and magazine and conference world. I've been an instructor at FDIC for approximately 23 years ish, and counting. And I've also I've been a hands-on training instructor, taught lectures there as well. I was lucky to keynote as well. And also serve as a advisory board emeritus with a Fire Safety Research Institute for Underwriters Laboratories, as well as doing some other consulting on some mass timber projects around the country, and really just getting back into the teaching side of the world.
Awesome. Yeah, you've got a storied career, and as we talked about before we started recording, I think you said you're the most famous person nobody's ever heard of, right?
Right. It was on one of my opening sound bites on my keynote. That's true. I've been, like I said, back in 2014, I've been a behind the scenes kind of guy. I just enjoyed being helpful to the industry, helpful to teaching. And I also forgot to mention, I was the editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue magazine, for those that are familiar with that, from the days for about 4.5, 5 years. And just been blessed to have a very charmed career and been able to work in busy shops at the Milwaukee Fire Department and, keep my fingers in everything, that I could, and, have some people take very good care of me throughout my career to let me do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. That's great. I understand the feeling, there's nothing wrong with those guys that like being in the background and just making sure the job gets done. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, for the audience's information, tell us a little bit about the Milwaukee Fire Department. Stations, engines, trucks, that sort of thing.
Yep. Actually, I mean, it's a major metropolitan fire department. One of these jobs that a lot of people haven't heard of, but like the IFD, Columbus, Detroit, and some of these other Rust Belt cities. We're very busy. You get to do everything you want to do in the job. There's special operations. We have dive team, boat team, technical rescue teams, hazmat teams. We have everything you're looking for. When I came on, we had about 37 engines and 16 ladder companies, and now we're down to about 30 engines and like 9 trucks, I believe, 8 or 9 trucks. So we've lost a lot in our department. However, thanks to some state legislation, they are mandated to start putting companies back in service. So we're adding them back. So we're one of those jobs that's been lucky the last couple of years, and our staffing has gone up as well. We used to have 5 person on every company. Now we only have several out of 5, and we still run a minimum of 4, which is lucky if you look around the country at a lot of places. But the Milwaukee Fire Department's hanging in there. They're doing a great job every day. They're a bunch of killers, and I miss working with them every single day.
Yeah, it's definitely not a small department. 30 engines and 9. Would you say 9 trucks?
I think let's say 8 trucks now.
Yeah. That's still much
And 2, I'm
larger
sorry,
than.
and 2 rescues, hazmat unit.
Mhm.
There are 2 rescues in the city as well, and as well as a dive and a boat, fireboat.
Yeah. Well, well, we don't have a fireboat in Indianapolis, so I can't relate to that, but we have
But you
all
guys
the
have a
other
good dive
stuff.
team.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about the dive run I was on yesterday, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll come up later in the conversation. But um, yeah, it's certainly not a small department. Like you said, it's one of those people, if somebody asks you name a city in Wisconsin, they're probably one of the first ones they're going to come up with is Wisconsin or Milwaukee. But a lot of people probably don't know as much about your department as they should, because like you said, you've got a storied history and it's a good sized fire department. Uh, you know, so that's worth mentioning. So you said you've got say 32, 34
Mhm.
years and
32.
32. So you did some volunteer time. You worked
Mhm.
for another department before you came to Milwaukee. So what was it about coming to Milwaukee that kind of drew you there? Was it just bigger department, more opportunities, more
That,
fires?
and I was actually teaching at the local tech college as a suburban firefighter, and 3/4 of the instructors are Milwaukee guys, and
Hmm.
um, it was just you were envious of the stories. They'd come back with fire stories every day, and and I say this in jest, but it's actually kind of maybe one of the overriding reasons I left was I lived across the street. I lived in the city of Milwaukee when I worked for the suburb, and my neighbor across the street, um, Dave, was a firefighter on Ladder 12, which is one of our busiest trucks in the city. A great place. They go to fires all day long, and we would both leave for work around the same time every morning. And I would go left to go work for the suburbs. He would go right to go to Ladder 12, and he'd take 5 roofs off houses, and I'd be kind of sitting there, maybe doing a couple of EMS runs and some fire alarms. And, we'd come back the
Yeah,
next morning, I'd hear his stories and I'd give him mine. And, I said, enough's enough. I'm going to take the test. And I was lucky to get hired.
yeah,
So,
that's absolutely. It's there's something to be said. You know, I don't fault anybody for wanting to be a firefighter. That
yeah.
calling and that passion and everything else, but uh, getting to go to work and doing the things that people, when you visualize what a firefighter does, there's something to be said for working for a department where you get to do those things, and I think that's valuable. So
Yeah,
you
you actually nailed that. I felt like a firefighter because you get the costume on, and I'm always of the mindset of whatever department you're at's the best one because you're there. I kind of I
absolutely.
tell that
Yeah.
for all new people, and I always ask
Mhm.
questions for firefighters. I teach. I say, "What's the best department?" And they'll say, "I don't know, Milwaukee." And it's like, yeah, no. Come back when you have the right answer. They eventually figure it out, but Milwaukee is definitely a job that'll make you feel like a firefighter, and every day you're there. I mean, it's very traditional. It's a very historic fire department. It's like I said, it's a old, kind of Renaissance Rust Belt city. So it has 100-some-year-old buildings, 200-year-old buildings, and a very eclectic housing stock of several types of vintage. So It's just a very cool city to be a firefighter in. Like I said, it's, it gives you all the fires you want. It gives you all the shootings, the stabbings, the technical rescue stuff. You'll get
Yeah.
everything you want to be a firefighter for in that town. So I encourage everyone to apply.
Yeah. I would emulate that regardless of what, where you live. If you want to aspire to be more involved and go to more jobs and do all the things that we all want to do, you know, look for that next opportunity. But while you're at your current opportunity, make it the best place
Mm-hmm.
you can work
Yep.
at. Right. So,
Yep.
so
Absolutely.
yeah. So you've graduated. We're going to transition here a little bit. You graduated from the Milwaukee Fire Academy. You're now a firefighter in Milwaukee. Talk about what was your experience like when you first went into the companies. What was your thought process? What were your goals? What were your aspirations? Or coming in, obviously coming in, you're a new guy. Um, you just want to be a good fireman, right? But at what point did you decide, hey, there might be something more? Maybe I want to be an engineer or a driver or you know apparatus operator, whatever you call them in your organization, and then on up to lieutenant, captain, and ultimately where you ended up.
Yeah.
That thought process like and throughout your career.
Well, briefly, I'll start at the beginning. I came on in Engine 28. Engine 28 has a very small response area in the city. It's just west of downtown and has a lot of high rise residential and a lot of 2.5 story Queen Anne type buildings and bungalows. And they kind of a very, like maybe 3 or 4 different type of building types there. But it was the greatest firehouse in the city to learn engine work. Very long stretches. You were 8, 9 stretches on a lot of those buildings. And when I went there, obviously I was just so happy to be on the Milwaukee Fire Department at that point that I never ever thought about promotion. And I had some education. I was teaching, I was doing all that stuff, but I was so happy being a firefighter there at the time. It really never registered until I went to a truck afterwards. Um, but it was just a different world, different planet. I mean, I came on the suburb I worked for, had three firefighters on a rig, and I'm with 3 firefighters in the back seat and 2 up front in that company. And so it was just a different world, and fires were a lot faster there. They were a lot more intense because you had 50 some people coming to every fire, and you were really, I mean, you were just in shock how fast everything went and how dialed in you had to be. And and I'll just give you a quick story about one of my first fires ever. They gave me the nozzle for the first time. It's one of the most vivid memories of my career where we had a vacant building on 29th Street. There's a vacant high rise, but they had some fully furnished squatter apartments in that place. And I remember I'm on the nozzle for that shift, and we had a fire. I think it's like the 5th or 6th floor. So we hand stretched all the way up there because obviously the elevators are out of service. We get up there, we're tired, and I just remember getting up to the hallway. I have ladders 1, 2, and 9 crawling up behind us. I have 3 more engines coming, and everybody seemed to have been in place right away. I get up there, and the top of this apartment door is burning off, so it's on. Right, everybody knew where the fire department was. Truck found it right away, and I remember getting up to the door. I'm kneeling on the nozzle, put my face piece on, and you're just you realize I have 40 some people in this building right now all waiting for me to get in there. And I'm almost hyperventilating. I'm like, okay, you're trained, you've been on a job before, you've been here before, let's get your stuff together here. And I worked with a phenomenal captain in that company, Mike Levinsky. And I remember him just kind of leaning into my face, and he goes, "You about ready?" It was the most calm demeanor. And it just went, whew. I was ready to go. Everything kind of disappeared. We went in and killed that whole apartment instantly. I mean, obviously this is seconds, but I remember thinking back then is, when am I ever going to get to that point where I'm cool, calm, and collected when the top of the door is burning off? The truck had a hard time getting the door because the squatters put 1,000 locks on it, right? And, just being that cool and ready. And so, I wanted to be that captain my whole, first few years in that company. Is just he was a god to all of us, and so were the chiefs. And but after that, I had some phenomenal chiefs in that battalion, and it was the 3rd Battalion. And I get to ladder 15 as a firefighter, and I probably had the best crew of my life, and just realized I'm learning so much stuff here. Maybe I should start studying for the lieutenant exam. There was a lieutenant exam coming up in a couple of years. And like the IFD, I mean, you have to start studying years out for lieutenant exam. Otherwise, you'll get smoked on the exam. And so a lot of us in the house were taking the exam. I studied really hard. I think I placed number 2 on the lieutenant list and was promoted right away. And from there, once you're there, you're in that lieutenant position, you start, figuring out how to be a boss, and you start, learning how not to be a boss the hard way usually. And, their joke on the Milwaukee Fire Department is, well, you take the lieutenant exam, so you can take the captain's exam, right? Because that's the big bump in pay and more responsibility. So, I kept studying, and I was able to get promoted to captain about 5 years later, and took the chief's test several years after that. But, like we mentioned before we hopped on here, we were talking about kind of how the chiefs were when we came on. And I remember Engine 28, like I said, I experienced in a volley in a suburban job, but I remember my very first day on the job, the battalion chief comes in because the probies are all working, right? And he walks in, his name is Pete Paczynski. He was a monster of a man. He's like 6'7", just big walrus mustache, smokes a cigar constantly. It's like the quintessential like chief you would draw on a piece of paper if I said draw a chief, right? And and he treated me like gold, and everyone in the firehouse, even that captain, I loved, just like they sunk to their knees when he came in. And, all our chiefs back then were viewed as gods, but, he was one of those guys. I was like, man, I'll never be this guy. I'll never be a chief on this job. I mean, when am I going to get to this point in my career to even be considered worthy of, putting a white shirt on? And, but it does come eventually as you learn, you get better, and you realize, if you don't take the test, someone else will. And you really only get great in a chief spot or a lieutenant spot once you're in there. I don't care how many classes you take or how great a firefighter you are. It's kind of two trains of thought. Some of the best lieutenants on the job will never take the test, and some of the greatest firefighters become the worst bosses. And it's really what you do once you're in there. So, once I made lieutenant, I never got scared of taking another exam.
Yeah, that's quite the roadmap, and there's a lot to dissect there. It's like you said, some of the greatest firefighters will never promote to lieutenant. Some people who do promote maybe shouldn't. So
yeah.
So what was it like when you first made lieutenant? You said you certainly made. And let me back up for a second. You said you went to Engine 28 out of the fire academy. Were you just, that was your new spot? You didn't move around, you didn't bounce, you didn't rove?
No, we have assigned rigs, and we don't hop rigs like some jobs do. I mean, you're assigned to an actual company, not a fire hall. Like some big cities, like Oakland, still assigns you to a firehouse, and you just bounce 1 month on the truck, 1 month on the engine or the med unit or whatever is in there. We don't do that. You're assigned an apparatus, and that's your company.
Okay.
So, and I think that's great for development. I mean, it'd be cool to jump back and forth to an engine and a truck, but I think professional development wise, your first few years, having that one company, the same, 18, 20 guys you're working with every day or during a week is going to develop you much faster than, depending on what rig you're on. So it works out for us.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. Everybody does it differently, and we do it differently than what Milwaukee does it. But I think there is a lot to be said. There's pros and cons to both sides of the coin there. Having the same faces every day and people getting to know one another and training with the same people, working with the same people, certainly has its merits. But I wouldn't fault somebody for doing something different. It's just,
I mean, and the other great thing is Engine 20 was a single engine company, so it was just the engine in there. So it was. I mean, we had an EMS supervisor that also worked out of there, and like an ambulance for city employees and injured cops at the time, or firefighters. But you didn't have a truck distracting you. You didn't have everybody wanting to cross the floor when somebody retired, got promoted, or injured, or whatnot. And so that house thought about the engine 24/7, and those maybe listening or watching that work in single engine companies know exactly what I'm talking about. When you have no distractions outside of, you're going to get your ass handed to running EMS all night in an engine company. But when you're thinking of 8-9 length stretches every day, and you're thinking of, how is the second new engine going to help us in this building? I mean, you become a really good engine firefighter quick. And then when you transfer to a truck, eventually you become an even better truck firefighter. So I don't care what anyone says. Everyone should go to engines out of the academy. I know it's, if I'm a Chiefs kid or I have a hook, I'm going to get struck by lightning. But, when I ran the fire academy in 2012 for a few years, I put all the probies on engines, and I had firefighters call me saying, "Hey, my kid's graduating, and I want him to go to lab." I'm like, "Nope, he's going to go on an engine." And that's not me being a tyrant, but I had the wherewithal to say, "No, they're going to learn the basic unit in the fire service and what really matters at a fire, and that's water and getting water quick and getting water and being good at getting water." So, and then once you're, because there are guys in my recruit class, they've been on trucks and never left, right? And they're not thinking about the first line. They're thinking about getting to the floor above the fire or getting, to the back or whatever. And they're not thinking, what's the status of the first line? Is there water yet? Why isn't the line started yet? What's going on here? And they tend to miss stuff. And that's when, firefighters get jammed up, is when we forget what's going on with the water, right?
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Over time, that exposure leads to cancer. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip. To learn more, visit magnagrip.com.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be the first to admit that for many, many years of my career, I took the engine for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly in my current role, but even prior to where I am now, I through my own self-education and exposure to different things, I'm like, man, as much as I like to brag about being a truck guy, and that's where I spent a lot of time in my career is on a truck. Nothing gets better for the most part until the engine shows up and starts putting water on the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And there's we do everything that gets done on the Fireground gets done so that the engine can do their job, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's important that people really, and I'm probably not the exception to the rule here. A lot of people take the engine for granted, right? It's just stretching a line, spraying some water. It's no big deal, but it's a big deal, and there's a lot to be said about estimating stretches and knowing where your hydrants are
Mm-hmm.
and what your water supply is and having a good, pump operator and having a company officer
Yeah.
that can do those size ups and know everything that needs to be done. So, the engine's where it's at. And I do agree that
Mm-hmm.
everybody should have a really good engine foundation before they aspire to be anything else, because at the end
And
of
it
the
makes you a
day,
better chief too.
yeah, yeah.
What good water looks like. I mean, you
Mhm.
just because they're flowing water doesn't mean you have good water in terms of enough hose, especially basement fires and private dwellings. I mean, you'll see a boatload of hose outside of the fire building, and you're like, where are they staging this hose? They're not going to make the front of this house. Let's say sweep through the basement, and so that's the stuff you tend to look at and really take to heart. And that's one of the myriad examples that you'd see, especially in multiple dwellings. I mean, you're gonna really care what the second engine's doing. Are they reporting in? Um, do they know that they're supporting the second right? I mean, which is our in our policy that we team up engines to get the first hose line in operation. But a lot of chiefs might just say start on a second line, go to the floor above just to do it, and then the second line gets snagged at the first location as the location of the first new engine, and everyone's wondering why. And so that's why coming on in an engine, I think, builds that solid foundation, so those mistakes aren't made 30 years from now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's jump ahead back up again to when you got promoted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you said you made lieutenant, and were you, as a lieutenant, were you assigned to a specific company, just like you were when you were a probationary firefighter, or how does that work for you?
No, you're assigned to a battalion, but that means you're
Okay.
essentially citywide. You bounce. So we bounce or rove, or we call them relief lieutenants, where
Mhm.
you could work in any. You're assigned to a battalion. If there's an opening in your battalion, you get to put there first. If no one's off on vacation or injury or something like that, then you'll go anywhere in the city. And we have 6 battalions in Milwaukee, so I mean you can essentially go to the win. And yeah, it was great. I mean, I was a young lieutenant, there were a lot of us young firefighters that got promoted at the time. They call us the Brat Pack. One of them was actually the current fire chief in the city of Milwaukee. And so, it was great. I got to work. Not obviously, I was fortunate to work in a busy battalion as a relief lieutenant. So I got to work in, all the great shops and, but you learn a lot. And like I said, you learn the job once you're in there. You know, nobody talked me into taking the test. I wanted to be one. And like I tell guys, only a firefighter is going to be the only one that talks you out of a lieutenant test, right? But once I'm in there, I realized, and we have like an officer's academy was only about 2 weeks. We don't have like a month. Let's say like New York has a month. I believe some other jobs put their bosses through for a month, which is phenomenal. But you essentially have to learn as you go. It's kind of like that's your seat, be in it when when the alarm goes off, and it's really kind of your pedigree, what you learned at the places you were at before, what you've studied, how what you really remember from the lieutenant exam, that kind of stuff. And you step on your own feet a lot. You do a lot of stuff. Obviously, being a young lieutenant, I was very aggressive. I like to drill all the time. When I bounced, I was assigned to Engine 5 as a lieutenant. That was my first house after bouncing for a few years. And they called me the dentist there because I drilled all the time. And but it was, you kind of learn, how not to overdo it after a while. But I mean, you want a great company, and there's ways to do that without, killing your guys and, making them drill just for the sake of drilling. I mean, some drills just happen organically, and obviously those are the ones, people are more receptive to. So, I got my people out of the firehouse a lot when we were on runs. We maybe took a different way back because we had a lot of vacants in Engine 5s there. I mean, there's just, thousands of vacants in the city, but they seem to all be in Engine 5s area for the most part. And so we'd stop and, maybe break in. I can say this now and I'm retired, but we'd break into a vacant and drill and do some stuff. And, and you learn more about your people, seeing them in those types of drill scenarios. And we'd try to stretch every day that we could. I mean, we weren't ridiculous about it, but if we weren't on a fire or a dumpster fire, we'd pay attention to how we stretched at every minute run. And that's how you get your company good quick. So you learn to kind of look for those kinds of drills versus just saying, okay, at 1500, we're going to go out, and I know you guys just ate lunch, but we're going to go out and, we're going to do standpipe work and, in this, multiple dwelling down the street or something like that. And then it's kind of like, all right, well, we'll go through the motions. But so that's stuff I learned training wise and personnel wise. I've learned, I mean, you're always going to learn the hard way first, right? But, you learn, especially as a new boss, you kind of learn that people always view you as a lieutenant. You don't have to prove it every day, right? So I see a lot, and chiefs do that more than, and admittedly, chiefs will do that a lot more than lieutenant or captain ever will, because they just think they don't have that approval from the guys, but you do. I mean, people want a boss, and they want you to act like one when it's time to act like a boss. You don't. There's like command presence, and there's commanding a presence, and I've seen, like I was fortunate enough to see the latter, and a lot of times, so I was able to avoid a lot of those issues, but I think new bosses will stumble on that faux pas more than anything, is they just think, oh, my people don't, they kind of blew me off the table today, and I brought this up, and they really were dismissive about it. Maybe they don't think I'm the boss, but they really do. And sometimes, you step back and let them work through some issues in the firehouse, and actually 90% of the issues will resolve themselves in 10 minutes if you don't insert yourself. So, again, that's all stuff you have to learn once you have the job, and I mean, I could talk about it in this podcast all day long until you actually go through it. Conversely, ask yourself, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it, have you actually come down on a fellow firefighter that you like or you're friends with? Have you had to discipline him or her? And, what was the relationship afterwards, right? So a lot of bosses don't understand that it does change the dynamic for your friendships and your peer friendships and the brother and sisterhood when you do that. But unfortunately, you will have to do that in your career, and you better be prepared for it. And you'll only learn how to do that the right way by doing it. So, those are all things that, that I learned. And I think they made me, the fact that I paid attention maybe more than some people to those, made me a better captain and chief officer. I think I'd like to think that, at least. Right. So.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to be digested there. And I've always said that there's two serious transitions that take place in a firefighter's career. And the first one is when they go from firefighter to lieutenant or captain,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the entry level officer position is. And then next is when you go from being a line officer to a chief officer. The biggest
Mm-hmm.
jump is from going from firefighter to company officer, in my opinion. And
I
then
agree.
secondarily going from line officer to chief officer, because
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely, going from private or firefighter, whatever you call them, to entry level supervisor. There's that whole buddy to boss dichotomy and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And not being one of the team, you're still a team member, obviously, but you have, ultimately you're the guy in charge. And then when you go from being the person in the burning building with your people, pulling hose, pulling ceilings, doing the searches, all that sort of stuff, to the person standing outside waiting for somebody to tell you, hey, we've got water on the fire. Hey, we've completed the primary search. To me, in my opinion, those are the two biggest um,
Mm-hmm.
mind shifts, or whatever you want to call them, that take place in a career. So, what was, if you had to name one or two of your biggest challenges before we're going to jump ahead after this to some of the stuff we talked about in our correspondence with the Fireground and everything, here in a little bit. But just before we do that, what were one or two of the biggest challenges that you saw for yourself going from line firefighter to company officer?
Um, I think it's, understanding that, you don't have, you need to never forget where you came from, but you're not there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very hard, because then you get these go along to get along bosses. You get the bosses that are constantly seeking approval, whether it's, derogatory talk at the table, whether it's disagreeing with the department, kind of being a malcontent hater or whatever. Like I said, people love, misery loves that kind of company, but in the end, somebody wants a boss, and they want you to be a boss because you're wearing, it says so on your shirt, right? And you want to be. I mean, if they don't see you as a boss, they're not going to bring issues to you. They're not going to say, "Hey, I have an FLSA paperwork issue. I have, my wife's pregnant. What do I do for, how many days do I get off?" I mean, you'll find out, and you'll see real quickly. You'll notice when people aren't coming to you, and that's when you kind of need to do some introspection, some self reflection, and also it's just learning. Sometimes it's okay for the troops or the men to kind of run certain things in the firehouse, and when you inject yourself into that, you can complicate it more than anything. I'll give you a really stupid one here, but when I was a bouncing lieutenant, I was working at Ladder 7, and that was a very senior company. It's way in Siberia, and our job on 80th and Bradley, and I think the junior firefighter in the company had 30 years, right? And they had this couch in the apparatus floor, and this thing was like 50 years old, and everyone had this committee to get rid of this couch and replace it. And it was just like this long, dragged out affair. So I get asked one day by one of the firefighters, like, "Hey, what would you do with this couch? It's like, it's causing a lot of problems." I said, "Take it in the dumpster right now and throw it out. Get rid of it." I mean, nobody sat on it because the thing was gross. I mean, you wouldn't, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't even donate it to science. It was so gross. And, they threw it out, and because the whole thing was, we have to throw it out, but what do we replace it with, right? So they threw it in the dumpster. So I come in the next day, and it was like I shot their dog in front of their kids, right? They were like, "I can't believe you threw that couch out, Lieutenant. You're a bouncing boss. You don't make those decisions here in the house." I'm like, "Well, hey, I just made a decision because you guys couldn't, right? At least I thought you couldn't." And it was such a big deal. The captain of that company, who I was covering for, was on injury leave, calls me, He's like, "What are you doing in my place? You're flipping it upside down." I said, "Dude, I threw a couch out." And, that's such a, throwing a couch out is maybe a good metaphor for being a boss of like, sometimes you just let them bitch. Sometimes you let them moan. Sometimes you let them just do their thing. If it doesn't involve what you're doing on a day to day, let it go. And I thought I was a hero by making this rapid decision to show that I'm a boss that can make rapid decisions. And I ended up flipping the house upside down over something so stupid. So those, again, like I said, you're only going to learn that by making those mistakes. But as a firefighter, I definitely probably would have had the same perspective. Like, who's this guy coming in, throwing a couch out? This is our house. That's our crappy, gross couch. So, it seemed stupid at the time, but it was such a big deal. But it was one of the greatest lessons. And that was like, one of those hater houses back then anyway. So they were looking for anything to hang a boss up on. And so all I did was just pour gasoline on a bigger issue. But so that kind of stuff. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always the law of unintended consequences, right? You think
Correct.
you're making a
Yeah.
great decision. It's a no-brainer,
Mhm.
slam dunk.
Mhm.
Who could find anything wrong with this decision? And somebody will, right? And you don't know I won't say you don't know what you don't know, because that's one of my least favorite sayings. But anyway, it happens, right? You try and do the best you can, and somebody will still come around and, like you said, find something to have a problem with. So, um, let's fast forward. You've gone through the ranks. You're now a battalion chief, and now you're in charge of, 6, 8, 10 companies. However your battalion was set up. And what was that thought process like, going from being a line boss to now you're in charge of line bosses and then they're firefighters? What were some things that you either didn't know, you thought you knew, but you didn't quite have right, or
Mhm.
things that you visualized going into it that ultimately proved to be true?
Well, like that couch scenario I just gave you, you have issues that'll, piss off a house. And now once you're a battalion chief, you have issues that piss off a whole battalion. So
Mhm.
it just get a little bit bigger. I guess perspective wise, this is something an old sage chief, told me when I made battalion chief. He sat me down and when you get promoted to battalion chief, you go and join the Chief Officers Association. And Sal Santoro was the chief. He was a long tenure chief. He probably had almost 40 years on before he pulled. But you had to go see Sal and kind of sit down with him, and he went over all the association stuff. But he also gave you kind of the advice and some of the first day stuff, first month stuff. And he said, look, when you're a firefighter, it's all funny, right? DUIs, somebody getting jammed up, somebody doing something really stupid at work, and um, shock value stuff in the firehouse. When you're a boss, half it's funny because you have to deal with it when it gets out. When you're a chief, none of it's funny. And at first I kind of dismissed that, like, well, no, you can remember where you came from a little bit, but he was absolutely right. People want a boss, but they want a chief even more, right? Because um, they want that command presence in the firehouse. They want it on the fireground, and I would say, just like being a lieutenant or captain, you learn the hard way a few times of when to insert yourself. Maybe an example is, you'll come in on rounds to, our chiefs have 5 or 6 firehouses they're responsible for as a battalion chief, and they're all different, and they have different kitchen tables at each one. And you have to learn, you're only going to learn this by doing rounds a million times, but sometimes people want your opinion as a chief on a new policy or something that bad that happened at a fire. And sometimes they just want to bitch in front of a chief. So once you learn to distinguish that, you kind of learn to not pour gasoline on problems. If they just want to bitch in front of a chief to get it off their chest and feel that they can, where feel like you're listening to them, they're going to love you forever. They're going to be able to, as long as you don't say, "Oh yeah, you're right. You're totally right. Oh yeah, this place sucks." Once you do that, you've lost all your legs. Um, but if you just nod and you say, "Yeah," you bring up some valid points. I'm going to talk to the deputy, and if you don't mind, I can, maybe have him come over here and we have this talk, or the boss can call him or something like that. But and sometimes they're say, "Hey, chief, what's your take on this new policy?" And what do you? That's a rhetorical question, right? It's whatever the department's take is on that, because everything you say in a firehouse will be repeated as a chief officer. It'll be, oh, hey, Roden thinks this new policy blows too. Well, guess who calls you? The deputy, because it's going to get out, and you have to explain why you just torpedoed a policy that needs to happen or whatnot, and so that kind of stuff. But not having a overriding command presence in the firehouse, not trying again, I wrote an article called "Your Shirt Still Looks White" for one of Billy Goldfeder's books. And I touched on a little bit of that stuff, but people know you're the chief. You don't need to prove it every day you go into a firehouse, and in the end, there's two types of chiefs: the ones people like seeing come in, and the other one is the ones they like seeing leave. And yeah. In reality, most jobs there really is no in between on that. I know I might be simplifying what the role of a chief is, but at a fire, which we'll talk about in a minute, my job as a battalion chief is to make sure it goes according to plan, and that's it. And the same thing in a firehouse, right? Is the boss doing what they're supposed to? Do they have open EMS reports if they're in the engine? Is there, is the administrative stuff that I have to come down and you want taken care of? Is the house a mess, or do the guys look like crap? You'll find that balance of when to interject and when to manage and pull the boss aside and do that kind of stuff. And in the Milwaukee Fire Department, they're very respectful of the chiefs for the most part. We don't have a lot of those issues, but I've heard horror stories in other jobs where they test the chief. They try to stand the chief up and at the kitchen table. And, as an aside, if they stand you up at the kitchen table, you got them right there because they chose the venue. So, yeah. That's why I tell my, new chief officers, I'm like, if they stand you up in front of the table, they're testing you and, return fire. And if they say, hey, chief, let's go in the office, say, nope, you chose the venue. This is where we're having this out. And then it'll be the last time that happens. So, that doesn't mean you're a tyrant, but, there's some stuff you can't put up with as well. And I'll keep saying it, but once you're in that position, you'll have to learn how that all goes. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about it here. You can read it in a book. But if somebody's in front of you and you do it a few times, you'll kind of figure out how to start and end it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always said the first person that figures out how to write a book that can teach you how to do all the things that aren't in the books, they'll never have to work another day in their life.
Yeah.
And I guess if you get enough heads together, maybe some of us can figure that out. But yeah, it's definitely a shift in gears, and it's definitely something that no matter how well prepared you think you are, you're woefully unprepared, or you're nowhere as near prepared as you thought you were. So
there's not a policy or procedure that the men won't find an angle or a loophole in. Yeah. And no matter how you write it, and that's a lot of times what you're managing, and just make sure that everybody does what they're supposed to kind of one, not hurt the individual, the department, or the company and the department in that order. And if a boss is adhere to that stuff, a chief's job is pretty easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you alluded to it a minute or two ago when you said we're gonna move on to the Fireground roles, and that was took us a little bit to get here, but I think it's important to kind of give the backstory. If you just jump straight to the meat of the conversation, then nobody has the backstory, nobody understands how you got to where you are, and some of the thought processes and dynamics that go into it. So, you were a battalion chief for several years. You ended up retiring as the citywide tour commander. So you were, battalion chief for however many years, and then you ended up being responsible for 6 battalions. I think you mentioned earlier. So, several hundred people on duty every day. You're going to fires. You're going to different emergencies. Not always fires, but it's what we tend to dwell on in these kind of talks. But from a battalion chief's role at a fire incident, what are some of the things that? Well, let's say this. As a battalion chief, what are some of the things you did going into a fire to get yourself prepared to manage that incident? And then once you got to that incident and you got your your head around it and you saw what you had to deal with, what are some of the things that you hoped to get or you expected to get from your company officers from a
Hmm.
communication standpoint? Um, and giving them time to work, obviously, I know we talked
Hmm.
about that. Is time certainly seems to speed up when you're standing out in front of a burning building with nobody talking to you. So, just talk a little bit about that and help our audience understand the difference between being inside the burning building and standing out front at the command post of that same
Hmm.
burning building.
Yeah, I mean, this might sound a little textbookish, but obviously, we have a rip and run sheet they're called that has the
Hmm.
the address and the frequencies and everything on there, and who's responding.
Hmm.
So you want to take a look at that real quick. And, I mean, we have a firehouse every 5 feet in Milwaukee, so you pretty much know who's going to what fires based on the address. You'll hear it, even in the middle of the night, you'll hear the streets. You're like, okay, well, it's, 32 is first in. You look at that, and then just real quickly, you just look. Oh, wait a minute, why is engine 27 there instead of engine 21? Oh, 21s is on a different run or whatever. So you have to be thinking 21s is probably going to pick up from an EMS run as soon as they can and take the fire in, that kind of stuff. But you want to look at who's coming for the initially, and then any other dispatch notes. Is it vacant? Is it placarded? I mean, we have some like critical incident stuff on some of our rip runs that gives us a heads up of what's going down. Um, but while you're responding, definitely listen to the radio. Is there a lot of chatter? Is there a little chatter? Obviously, if there's a little chatter in the beginning, that means it's probably a pretty decent fire, and they're getting going on it. And if there's a lot, they're doing an investigation. They're going to talk to each other a little more about, hey, go around the back or do this. And then um, when you get there, like I alluded to earlier, a battalion chief's job is just to make sure everything's going according to plan. Um, and the way to do that is first, as a chief, is get off the damn radio. Um, let everyone know you're there. Say, hey, Battalion 7, or, Battalion 7's on scene. That's all you really have to say. Then they know the chief's there. And hopefully your first do truck is going to radio, hey, or, fires in apartment 4A, or, we have heavy fire in the basement, that kind of stuff as you're walking down the street. Um, park your buggy in a place that's not going to block a later arriving truck of the rescue out, or an ambulance that needs to get in there. And, um, but get off the radio. I mean, that you want to. I'll talk about kind of the first three things I would think about when I got there. But it's very easy for especially a new chief officer to get on the radio and have a script of saying, okay, hey, ladder 9, what do you got? Hey, engine 32, what do you got? That kind of ends up becoming a script. I see it. I had one battalion chief. I think I said this in an article, but this chief had a script down to the last transmission before he picked up at every fire. And he would get on scene and just like a robot say, engine 32, what do you got? And it was kind of annoying because, you're starting a line with your guys, you're trying to get in there, you're waiting for the truck to do whatever, you're masking up, and, you can say something quick, like, hey, we're masking up, we're about to go in or whatever. But, he would want like this big soliloquy of what's going on, and, what's the barometer pressure inside the building versus outside. I mean, it's just very off-putting sometimes. In fact, this chief was on rounds at my firehouse, and when I was a captain 32s, and he's driving right behind us. We had a fire right on Lloyd Street. This cockloft is sailing. I mean, the attic, I should say, is just sailing on this place. And he pulls up right behind me. And he goes, engine 32, what do you got? And I'm just like, I said, I got an attic full of fire. What do you got? And, I got my ass slapped a little bit for that, but it was, he was just so scripted that he tended to overlook, hey, an attic fire, it's a 5-length stretch in a Queen Anti-Billy Milwaukee, or 2.5 story. It's going to be all hands kind of getting stuff ready. And so, let your companies work. So that's one thing. As you arrive on scene, take a look, do your 360, whatever, if you can do one. Kind of, listen to what's going on and see who's there. As the first two engines started a line yet, is the second do there, ripping another line off the rig. But the first thing I look for is obviously positioning, because once, they drop supply lines in the street, you're not moving anything. Our engines are very good, especially our first two engines are very, very good about not nose to nosing into blocks and, backing down, and I mean, every rig backs down in the city of Milwaukee. We reverse lay everything. But the first two engine will pull just past the building if they're going off the side. So your chiefs really don't have an issue with that, but sometimes you do. If you have a new driver, new boss, they might stop right in front of the fire building, and so look to get them out of the way so the truck can get right in front, or we like to get two trucks if we can in front of the building. That stuff, and then the first line again. It goes back to the initial beginning of our talk here of the first line, right? I want to know what's going on with that first hose line more than anything else. After getting rigs out of the way if they're in the wrong position, and status of searches. What are we doing here? What's our life hazard? Did neighbors say somebody's in there? Do we have kids up there, et cetera? Once you those are really the only three things you need to worry about in the beginning, I would say. And this is the first few seconds of a fire, first few minutes. You can kind of piece everything else together because the info comes quick once everyone starts getting there and people start talking to the chief, right? So, so once you have that stuff down, you just make sure everybody goes where they're supposed to be going. We have, our books have, positional assignments in order of arrival assignments is what people are doing. So it's for us, again, it's very easy. I mean, I could just pull that out and say, okay, yep, 32s is there, yep, 30s is there, 28s is there. And that's it. And just make sure they rotate, that the fire goes out. And it usually, fires go out pretty quick by us because like I said, we have, at least two engines on scene in under 5 minutes, 90% of the time. So, it seems like that, but it's probably 7 minutes or whatever if you're looking at NFPA stats. But it feels like everyone gets there pretty quick in Milwaukee, and so we're fortunate where sometimes it feels like you're managing adequate resources, and when there's some issues with that versus managing inadequate resources. There's problems with both, right? So, because like IFD, every company that arrives wants to do something when they get there, right? So, make sure people aren't breaking more windows because again, looking at that first hose line, if it's not hasn't been stretched yet, first two trucks are going to start taking windows out, right? Because they want to, they know their inside guys are in there searching, and then they're going to go to the roof and start cutting holes, and there's no water yet. So, really, maybe another adage is, your job is, to support or not support what the first few companies are doing as a chief when you get there. Maybe I gave away the secret sauce of being a chief, but it really is that easy, folks. And, and chiefs can actually complicate it by, trying to change somebody's position or, call an audible on something like that. But most, my guys know where they're going. So it's literally just, okay, well, why isn't the second new engine going up there yet? Then you can find out why. And that's when a chief needs to get on the radio and start getting to the bottom of things. But other than that, there's very little comms, from our chiefs and, unless things are going. And we send three chiefs to every fire, and, one is command, one is operations, and one is a safety. And the only one that should be yapping on any fireground frequency is the ops chief, unless the safety sees something going down, So we don't have a lot of radio traffic of 80 chiefs sounding like Howard Cosell trying to, call a football game or anything like that. So, I think we make it pretty easy on chiefs in the city of Milwaukee.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for that, and having good companies will make that be the case. Yeah, absolutely. You said a few things there, and one thing I want to start out with initially is, you're thinking you said you looked at the rip and run, and you're looking at who's on the run, and you're like, well, why would you say 27s instead of 21s on this run or whatever? There's a lot of things, you get dispatched to a fire, you're as a company officer or a firefighter, you're like, hey man, we're going to work. This is supposed to be a fire, but oftentimes those folks may not, hopefully the company officer does, but certainly the firefighters probably don't take into consideration, well, 27s is normally our second due here, but I missed the fact that they didn't say 27s, they said 21. So they're coming from twice as far away or whatever the case might be. But, how does that impact potentially the incident? But as you mentioned, as a company officer, you're looking at, or as a chief officer, you're looking at those things and you're looking for the additional information. Certainly the company officers are probably looking at the either the ticket or their computer if they have a computer in their apparatus, and they're hopefully seeing those incident notes as well. But as a chief officer, it's even more important for you to be thinking about, or for us to be thinking about those things, because you have to be planning 2 or 3 steps ahead, right? Um, you know, if you're the company officer or you're the firefighter, you're thinking about, what am I going to do when I get there, which is in the moment. But as a chief officer, you have to be thinking, what happens if there's a bad hydrant? What happens if the stretch is short? What happens if there's fire in multiple locations in the building? What happens if the first line, they put water on the fire, but it doesn't get the job done? Am I going to have to call for extra companies? Am I going to have to do who knows how many different things, right? So I think it's important for folks to understand that when you get to that command level position in your organization where you're running an incident versus responding to an incident, or dealing with the incident, at the operations level, that there's a whole lot more thinking, or a whole lot more projection that has to go into it, that maybe you take for granted, that's taking place when you're in the trenches doing the tactics, right? That was one
Yeah.
thing I took away from it. And then the other thing that I really appreciated you saying was, I'm sorry, did you want to say
No,
something?
no, no. I was just gonna say, just to to validate your point. I mean, it's cliche to say that you have to think 3 steps ahead of the fire because most of the time you can't. Because if
Yeah.
your people are there, you're not going to really have to. But
Hmm.
we use a 27-21 scenario where
Hmm.
if you have an exposure problem and that your third or fourth due engine is twice as far away, now you're shaking out your shorts as a chief because you have 2 lines committed to the interior and they're still
Hmm.
getting it and it's exposing, and then you're pulling whoever you can to maybe start an exposure line. I mean, that's where it gets problematic. And like I said, we have adequate resources in Milwaukee for the most part. Um, and still that can be a problem in my job if something like that were to happen because of a delayed response or something like that. So as a chief, you look and you see a ton of fire. I mean, we special call rigs all the time. We call it a 1-in-1, which gets an extra engine truck a lot of times. But if you have a scenario where you have an exposure that's threatened, you see that rip and run, you see a delayed response, call second alarm. Nobody's going to be pissed that you got sent to a fire, right? Um, so call that second alarm, stage them down the block or something like that, and then you can piece them the companies out of it if you have to. And at least you have stuff coming in case you have 2 or 3 houses going now, which happens often in Milwaukee based on the the geospatial locations of our houses. Some are 12 inches apart. I mean, Indianapolis has the same thing. And so it's very common. You have an exposure fire, you have 2 exposures pretty quick. So, but that's what I mean by getting ahead but that rip and run can tell you when I get there, okay, I have a delayed or out of order, companies on here, or if there's another fire down the street. I've been on a million of those where you're getting hodgepodge, land and misfit toys companies coming in from all over because there's a grader going on in another battalion or a fire down the street. So you've got that's thinking ahead is like, okay, if I pull up and there's an explosion, it's the second alarm right away. I'm not even gonna dick around with this. So
Yeah.
so just validating your point with a longer point. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then the other thing you said that I really appreciate, and this, um, I'll expand on it here in a second, but you made the statement that you've got to give your companies an opportunity to work.
Mm-hmm.
And and going from that was one of the things that I tried to prepare myself for as a battalion chief, making that transition, from company officer to battalion chief. But you've got to give, as a battalion chief, you have to understand that there's probably going to be a lot of radio silence if everything's going
Mm-hmm.
well,
Yep.
and you've got to rely upon things like looking at the building, like you said, do your 360 if you can, and all those sorts of things. But you know, what did the smoke look like when you pulled up versus what does it look like now? Did it go from jet black to light gray to white?
Mm-hmm.
Is the hand line, herking and jerking back and forth in the front yard where you can determine that somebody's opening and closing the bail, that you're flowing water, and because you need to be able to read those indicators as the incident commander, because like you said, in many instances, the person who should be or will be communicating to you when they have the opportunity is probably in the midst of doing something that probably needs to take place rather
Mm-hmm.
than talking to you on the radio, right? But
Yep.
as incident commanders, there's a lot of indicators that we can identify outside without having to burden our
Mm-hmm.
the company officers with, hey, can I get an update? What do you got in there? Um, you know, how's that search going? And
Yep.
it's like, well, if those things were, like, how's that search going? Well, if it was done, I'd tell you, Chief.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
we had, yeah, I mean, if we had water on the fire, um, then you would probably see the smoke going from black to light gray to white, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that we as incident commanders probably should be doing for ourselves that maybe some aren't. So I think there's some there's some importance there too. So
Yeah, I mean, a boss should be talking to his nozzleman, not the chief at that point. If
right,
if
yeah,
if stuff's really happening inside. So, and like I said, we have those visual indicators by change of smoke,
hmm
and everyone sees conversion on a fire with the first two engines, so everyone can see. A
right,
Proby on the third due truck that's pulling down the box is going to see conversion from the first two engine doing their job. So, I always really reinforce that with my chief officers is let the troops work, and if they're not getting, I mean, they're going to tell you if something's wrong and they need something on the interior. Hey, we've got a remodel in here. Hey, we have a fridge against the door here. Send another truck up to help us move this fridge and to get this bedroom or whatnot. That kind of stuff, and they're going to tell you. I mean, your troops have enough radio discipline. They're going to they'll report in hazards and other safety issues. So yeah, definitely. Any chief listening to this should just I mean, it doesn't mean you don't check in or do whatever, but if your job has a plan, then get off the damn radio. Conversely, there's jobs. I'm not going to say the incident command program that a lot of jobs subscribe to, but there's one out there where everybody reports to the chief for an assignment, and it could be the first two truck might take a second line, the third due engine goes to the roof, and that's what I see in in a lot of the scenarios on that program. And in my opinion, if you have to report to the chief for an assignment, your job doesn't have a plan. Maybe street laws based on building type, but there's no plan in that job. And that's where chiefs have to get on the radio, and you get all this excessive chatter, and you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss maydays. You're going to miss, um, location of a fire, numerous fires in the same building, that kind of stuff. So, um, having more stuff in writing means less talking on the radio in a nutshell.
hmm yeah, absolutely. And as you historically, as an incident would come to an end, you'd mark the fire under control, fires out, lost stop, whatever you call it in your organization. Um, Crews are picking up. What are some things that you would do as a battalion chief with your companies? Would you have it might be as simple as, hey man, everything went well. Appreciate you guys' hard work. Awesome job. See you on the next one. To, hey, here's some things we probably should have done differently, or here's some things that I didn't like. How would you handle those types of situations? Would you deal with? I mean, obviously, I realize there's varying degrees of severity, right? There's the minor screw up to, hey, we got somebody hurt here that shouldn't have gotten hurt. I mean, there's levels there, right? But just as a general rule, um, if you had issues with your folks, or you had something you wanted to talk about, would you normally do that on the scene, on the tailboard? Was it something that you would do more? Hey, I'll bring everybody to a certain firehouse and let's get together and talk it over. How would you handle those types of situations?
Well, I'll add another layer to that question. I mean, as a company officer, and I mean, this has been written in a million books, and this isn't my idea by any means, but it was one I always subscribed to, was talk about every fire you go to on the back step
hmm
before your feet leave the pavement, I think is the term. The fire
hmm
building is right in front of you. You can talk to your guys candidly as a boss. You can say, "Hey, how'd it go?" One of the transmissions I make, if I don't hear any comms from my people for a little while, I'll get on the radio, I'll say, "Hey, engine 32, are we winning or losing?" Right? That's kind of juggles their psyche to say, "Oh, I better report it and let the chief know what's going on, even though I see conversion." Right? But and the other one is, as an officer, I'm sorry, I'll bounce back and forth here, but as an officer, I had very candid talks. I would admit stuff I did wrong. I said, "Hey, we advanced too fast in that room. It got hot on us, and the second line didn't even get up there before we were kind of in a jam, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want is to get chased out if you're the first due engine, right? That's like one of the worst things you can do as an engine boss is have to bail your crew out because you did something stupid. And then you'd have somebody say, "Hey, I had a mask bomb at the back door," or "Hey, I had trouble getting hose into the basement at this fire." And you can have those talks. Say, "Hey, you know what? I'll tell you next day we'll drill on basement fires or whatever." But or take them back into the building. Hey, where did the hose get snagged? Why didn't you get the hose down there? Oh, well, there was like a small fence, landscape fence right by the back door. So I had to, I couldn't stage hose there because everyone's throwing ladders there. So you kind of get, reasons why. So you're not necessarily blame, but you kind of get to the bottom of why, right? As a chief, I always make a transmission. Hey, nice job, everybody. On to the next one or something. I try to sound cool somehow or say something, right?
Yeah.
But I would grab the boss. Some chiefs in Milwaukee would grab the whole Fireground company officers, firefighters, and everybody be in a big semicircle around. And that's great. That's good to do. You have to be a cheerleader a little bit as a chief. But I would usually just pull some bosses aside of the first few companies. Hey, what'd you have when you got here? And and hey, nice job. I mean, or hey, the whole ass end of the building was board ups. Make sure that the second you truck, hey, maybe start working on those before you put your guys on the roof and stuff like that. And it's just it's not to critique in a negative way. It's more of like, what do we miss? Because we're gonna get another one on the street before we all leave this firehouse, right? So let's do it better next time. Um, you know, but the bosses again, they'll be very candid. But the building's right in front of you, versus going to their firehouse on round saying, "Hey, that fire we had on 43rd Street the other day, yeah, I noticed you had board ups in the back. You didn't get. Oh yeah, I thought the rescue was getting those and stuff like that." So it's easier to kind of exaggerate and embellish and that kind of stuff when you're talking about something later, or even on the way back to the firehouse, right? So. But when it's there for everyone to kind of reference and look at, you get a lot of honest feedback. And even as a chief, I'd say, "Oh, hey guys, I didn't mean to talk on the radio too much," or hey, I missed that you asked for, another company up there to search because you guys were, caught in a, whatever, a knee wall or something like that. But searching a knee wall bedroom, I should say. So stuff like that, you can kind of have some self-deprecation as well and some honest, feedback from your guys about how you did as a chief. And again, my job is respectful of chief, so it's not gonna be like, "Yeah, you really sucked at this fire, chief." But hey, chief, I don't know if you heard, I called for a second, the truck up here. Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a lot of work done, and it ends up becoming a de facto drill, right? When you're kind of reviewing stuff, and I always love critiquing fires and stuff like that because obviously I love going to them as much as anybody. And but getting to the bottom of what went right or wrong is the job, before and after. So.
Yeah, no, that's important. Having those, and I like to say, the C&C, right? That's what I call it anyway. You want to be constructive, not confrontational when you have those discussions, right? And that goes a long way, not only for that incident, but in so many, that's building that relationship. We don't always think about it in that context, but having those conversations and letting the guys know, hey, the chief might point something out that I did wrong, or he would have preferred that it was done differently. But he's not going to be an asshole about it, right? He's not going to be confrontational. He's going to be constructive. And then down the road, you have a personnel problem, or down the road, you have a policy disagreement, or down the road, you have another fire and there's something that doesn't go quite the way you want it. It's, I know the chief's coming to me because he cares and he's not just trying to put me on the spot, So I think that it's important for people to understand. You don't have to drop the hammer just because you got the most bugles on your collar, right? You can be subtle about it and be, conciliatory and all that, and say, yeah, I could have done something. I could have done this different, right? I should have stayed off the radio, or, sorry, I missed your transmission that you needed a second line, or you need more, whatever it was. We all make mistakes, right? So, but it's a team effort at the end of the day, and it's not a dictatorial operation, although, I guess ultimately it is in a paramilitary organization, but we try not to operate in that, at least I don't. I try not to operate in that mindset that it's more collaborative than it is dictatorial. So, Yeah, I really appreciate your insight on that. Coming from somebody that I have known from afar for quite a long time, um, and respect your opinion. I think that, and not only that, but it reinforces a lot of what I've thought I was doing right, and now it's just like, well, one other guy that I has served in similar roles, kind of doing things, the same way. So I appreciate that. We've been going for a little over an hour now at this point, and I try and keep them roughly an hour, but I think we've covered a lot of good information. And before we wrap up today, I would like to cover a couple of things that they're still fire service related, but they're not necessarily directly day-to-day fireground operations, and that is your involvement with FSRI and some of the work that you've done with the timber truss construction that's starting to
Mm-hmm.
show up across the
Oh yeah,
United States. So I don't know. I'll give you the option, whichever one you want to start with. But I would like to cover those two things real quick. Not only
sure.
what you've done in the past, but what's going on now and what you see coming up in the future that the American Fire Service needs to be aware of and needs to get themselves a little
Yeah.
bit better educated on.
Yeah, well, I've been involved with FSRI at UL for a lot of years now. They had you know, a charter board that was established, and Steve Kerber started adding some other people, and that's when I got a phone call to join. I was very honored to be a part of that.
Mhm.
In the beginning when they were getting all that up and running and doing the initial testing, and we were also able to bring some knee wall tests to the city of Milwaukee based on the fact that we're inundated with Indianapolis, you're inundated with tons of those.
Mhm.
Um, but it was a very eye opening seeing the science behind that, and I know there was a civil war, around '05 to '10, behind some of the science that was coming out about inside versus outside,
Mhm.
um, and it essentially we quantified putting water on the fire is the very best thing to happen on the fire ground. And you know you know a firefighter in 1875 in the city of Milwaukee would have told you the same thing. Oh, if you get water on the fire, everything gets better, right?
Mhm.
So I think we got a little smarter, not just quantifying the thermodynamics behind that, but the understanding that how important that is versus why it's important on top of it. And um, you know dispelled some of the myths. Like, I think I said this on the podcast as well, but we had when I was at Ladder 15, we had a captain of Engine 36. They were our competing firehouse down the street. I was quarter of Engine 37, Ladder 15. There were 36 of those, single engine company, and they had a captain there who would always hit basements from the exterior in private dwellings. He'd pop a window from the outside, put a hose line in, and put it out. And we would get so damn pissed when we pull up on scene. You see that white smoke coming from a basement and a line not even inside. We're throwing our tools on the ground. You're all pissed off, and you're like, "Get in there!" You're embarrassing your company, and everything. But it wasn't that he was ahead of his time; as he was just one of the first realists on the Milwaukee Fire Department, maybe, or in the fire service nationwide, because he didn't mess around with basement fires. He goes, every fire I've been burned at is in a damn basement or an attic." And you know, I remember I saw him at a retirement send off, and I said, how far ahead of your time we should put a bronze statue of you at the FSRI headquarters, um, because I wonder how many burn injuries he saved doing that. Because 36 had a lot of Cape Cods and bungalows in that area, and those basements they're tiny. They can hold a tremendous amount of fire, and we have a lot of boom frame around the rest of the world there, and um, he probably prevented a ton of bad stuff from ever happening in 36's area over those years. And everybody likes to get inside. To this day, I'd rather go inside than stay outside. But if there is an issue getting water on the fire, you better damn as well hit it. I mean, as a chief officer, I didn't dick around with it. That was a split second decision. I knew, the second, I saw what was going on the first line, that they weren't going to get in right away. The truck's having a problem with the door. I've been there where, I'm sitting there, with fire blowing over my head, masking up at the back door, and the truck's trying to get, two security doors popped, and the fire's literally continuing to blow out one or two windows over my head because we don't put water through the windows. We got to go right in through that door, right? Even though the door and the window are literally maybe this far apart from each other. So I'm going to start water at that back door anyway. So but we were just conditioned that's a fault. You just don't do that. And then fires get worse. And then we're, with our balloon frame, we now have attic fires just because we were waiting to get in the goddamn back door. So we don't do that anymore. We're a lot smarter, and not just Milwaukee, but, nationwide. But it took gazillions of dollars in research and people and instrumentation and thermocouples to just tell us that's what we should have been doing the whole time. So that's what I'm proud of being a part of at FSRI and UL. It's just being smarter about putting water on the fire. If I can kind of sum it up. The wood high rise stuff. A lot of you are probably aware of, the mass timber construction that's kind of seeing a renaissance. There's a lot of sustainability measures across the United States and Canada, actually all over the world, actually. And so they're really, really looking at this type of construction. It's type 4 construction, 2.0, if you will. There's cross-laminated timber, nail-laminated timber. It's essentially engineered mass timber. The stuff is very good, it's very safe, believe it or not. I mean, it has, prescriptive char layers that are designed to char and prevent, any more, convective or conductive heat through other members on the column. And so it's actually been interesting being a part of that. We have the world's largest mass timber high rise in the city of Milwaukee, and that's kind of how I learned a lot about the industry outside of what we were doing with cross-laminated timber at UL. And as this building was being built, I was part of all the fire testing for the structural members of that building. I was just astonished at how well this held up to, in comparison to the conventional steel and concrete we're used to. And so, now I advocate for, fire departments understanding that type of construction. It is coming to your town, and it's going to keep going up and up and up. We have a 50-story wood high rise going up in the city of Milwaukee, likely end of 25 or early 26. And it's here to stay. It's a sustainable, construction method. So it's not going anywhere. It's not cheaper construction. That's another misinterpretation of what it is, but it's, the sustainability gets approvals. It gets a lot more press, and a lot of developers are looking to do that because it's also aesthetically pleasing. So I'll be ready for it. That's one of the things I'm helping the industry and fire departments understand is, when it comes to your town, here's what it is and here's what it isn't. And so I'll be doing a little bit more of that stuff as we go on, as I continue my career and educate people the right way, industry and fire services, to how things could be and should be.
Well, excellent. Appreciate that information. I know that we haven't, to my knowledge, haven't had any of those developments or buildings pop up here in Indianapolis, but we talked about before we started recording, it's only a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
8 years ago, 10 years ago, I saw these concrete buildings with first floor concrete and wooden 4 and 5 story buildings off the first floor, and they started calling it, this hybrid construction. And I'm thinking, where in the hell did this come from? And so I know that, 6, 8, 10 years ago, that was brand new, and it's only a matter of time until these buildings that you're talking about, this modified heavy timber type 4 construction, whatever we want to call it, shows up here as well. So yeah, it's just it's amazing, the building engineers, structural engineers, they keep coming up with faster, cheaper ways to build things, but having guys like you around that are at least being asked for input on some of these things, goes a long way, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a very responsive industry to the fire service. Very responsive, more than any other. Like I said, I've done a lot of code stuff with the city of Milwaukee on other building projects, but none has been as receptive to our concerns as the mass timber industry.
Well, that's great. That's good to hear. I really appreciate it. So, Eric, we're kind of wrapping up here. In the last couple of minutes, anything you want to say? Anything that we missed that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, no, I just, I missed the job tremendously. I mean, I've joined my local fire department part time to kind of get the costume on again once in a while, and help them
Mhm.
out. A good bunch of people, and doing some teaching and stuff like that. But it's I've had a phenomenal career. I'm glad. Thank you for letting me talk about it, and
Yeah.
never gets old talking about the job, and it's the best job I'll ever have, and I hope to be doing something in it or staying a firefighter until I'm dead. So, um, it never leaves your blood, even in retirement, and you'll miss the job, you'll miss the people more. Um,
Hmm.
but make sure that how you leave, and especially as a chief, that you miss the people more than the job. I think then you've done things the right way. If you miss the job more than the people, I think you kind of had your priorities backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I could follow that up with anything better. So um, I'll just say thanks to everybody for tuning in this evening. Um, I'm Eric Dreiman, host of the Hooks and Hoses podcast on behalf of the Fire Engineering Network. Dave Rhodes, Diane Rothschild, uh, Chief Bobby Halton, posthumously, who gave me this opportunity originally to host this podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you in September. Be safe.